Very happy to be here and very happy to be traveling again, quite frankly. And it's a privilege to talk to so many people that are so active in such a professional potato industry as in South Africa. And if we could put my first slide up, I would appreciate it. So as said, my name's Charles Miller. I'm the commercial director at Sylinta. At Sylinta, we're a hybrid potato breeding company. That's right, we made hybrids out of potatoes, just like you have hybrid maize, you have hybrid sunflower, and many other hybrid crops. Sylinta has been credited with the development of hybrid potatoes. And today we're going to talk about what Sylinta has done, the benefits of hybrids, and the benefits of the hybrid technology to potatoes when those genetics are delivered from true seeds. Next slide, please. Oh, I can do that. But I'm going to start off just by giving you a little bit of repetitive information, I expect. In agriculture, we have huge challenges facing us for the future. And I know we're going to talk about the future as we go through this conference. We need to produce a lot more food. Why? Because there's going to be a lot more people on this planet in 50 years. And the people on this planet are demanding a very high quality of food. We also know we're going to have to do that on less land. Our cities are increasing. That means the good farmland is decreasing. We know we have to do it with less water. And here in South Africa, I know everyone in this room is very aware of the challenges of water. Where I grew up in Texas, we're also very aware, so we have that in common. We also happen to be working with a crop that's very efficient at using water compared to other food crops. We're going to have to do that with a smaller carbon footprint because most people in the world want that. They want the planet to be sustainable. And really, farmers have been being sustainable for a long time. Without the land, without quality soil, we don't have a business. We can't support our families. So this is already ingrained in what we do. And of course, we're going to have to reduce pesticides and other chemicals that we use because that's also what our consumers want. We all really know these things, but I think it's worth thinking about again. And how do we solve these issues, right? All right. Can we go to the next slide? Maybe I'm too far away. So to summarize, we have to feed more people, which means we need more food. It's got to be more nutritious on less land, with less inputs, less water, and we have to deal with the climate change. So it's not a problem for this industry, right? We're all innovative. So we'll figure it out. Okay, the batteries die? I didn't know load shedding impacted batteries. So what if we can do all that and reduce hunger? We can dramatically reduce pesticide use. We can reduce the impact our industry has on climate, and we can reduce water usage. And what if we can do that in our crop by using that tiny seed? Big problems, but a very small seed that can help solve that. So, probably everybody in this room is much more familiar with this information than I am. I come from the hybrid seed industry background. I come from maize, sorghum, sunflowers, and I've only been involved in potatoes for about the last 4 years. But I think I learned a little bit about potatoes in the last 4 years. Potatoes are more nutritious than most foods. They use less land per calorie, they use less water, and they also grow in harsher climates. And that's not me, that's a quote from the FAO. We also know it's the third most consumed crop on the planet behind wheat and rice. But potatoes come with some problems, and I think all of us in this room have probably dealt with those problems. You know, we saw some yield charts this morning that kind of went up and up and up, and so I'd have to ask a question, does that increase in yield come from genetics, or does it come from management? Obviously, it comes from a combination of the two, but if I look at the most popular potatoes around the world, it really makes me question whether or not it's coming from genetics at all. I mean, look at the U.S. The most popular product in the U.S. is a russet Burbank. Its genetics are 150 years old. So is that innovation? I don't think so. But you can say the same thing about Europe. And Europe's one of the most popular is Benji. It's been around for 75 years. And there's also a very popular product here, Mondial, I think, that's been around for 30 or 40 years. Not saying they're not good products. I'm just saying the gain that we're seeing is not coming from genetics. It's coming from our improved understanding of how to grow potatoes. And we're doing a really good job with that. But when we compare that to other crops, we see yield increases every year as a direct result of genetics. Of course, another problem, and this is about the time that the seed producers in the room start throwing seed tubers at me, the other problem is seed tubers. They're difficult to transport. They don't store well in harsh conditions. And every time you reproduce them, if there's any issue at all, disease goes up, which means we're inefficiently transporting disease product around the world. And of course, the certification agencies really help us reduce that. And particularly here in South Africa, we do an amazing job at that. But is there a way to improve that? Well, at Syngenta, we think so. And we think one of the ways to solve both of those issues is through hybrid breeding and then delivering those new genetics with true seeds. So why hybrid breeding? Well, we talked about genetic gain earlier. And in potatoes, it's really complicated to breed, and you guys probably all know this much better than me. But there's 4 sets of chromosomes, therefore there's genes everywhere. It's really random to find something new and then be able to isolate it and be able to increase it. Depending on how you estimate the time, it can take between 15, 25 plus years to actually identify and then start to produce a new variety. And if we're going to solve all those challenges I talked about in the first few slides, we can't wait that long. We have to be faster. Hybrid breeding is fast. We know that. If you've ever grown maize, and you probably have a nice rotation crop of maize from time to time, or that's part of your farm in another way, you know that all the time these maize companies are coming out with new products. They do this, they do that, they have a different kind of starch, you name it. And in the end, that's a fast process. Why is it fast? Because maize is a diploid. That means it has 2 sets of chromosomes just like people do. And there are naturally occurring potatoes that are diploids with 2 sets of chromosomes. So why do we work with 4 sets of chromosomes in traditional products and not the diploids? Well, it just so happened that when the early collections were made from South America, they brought back tetraploids. But the most requested and the most desired products in South America from a consumer point of view are diploids. So they obviously have something that they bring to the party. And when you apply hybrid breeding, you can create very uniform female lines and male lines with very specific traits moved into those, completely GMO-free, by the way. And then once you have those traits aligned, you make a hybrid. And at that moment, you have aligned all the genes necessary for any particular trait you're looking for. Very simplistic, right? But to do that, if you understand the genome and if you understand the genes you're looking for, you can do things very quickly. We can make a new hybrid with a specific trait as long as we know where the trait is in 2 years. And I'm going to show you some pictures to help see that, because I know I grew up on a farm and seeing what my neighbor did makes me believe. Otherwise, I don't believe it. So I mentioned maize earlier, and maize was one of the crops that is really easy to talk about when it comes to hybridization, because since about 1935 when maize was hybridized until now, basically we have a 500% yield increase. I mean, that's pretty impressive, frankly. Now, you could attribute some of the most recent gains to GMOs. Now, we're not talking about that at Syngenta. We're traditional hybrid breeding. But still, it's a huge yield increase. Imagine what we could do in the world with food security if we can do something even half that within potatoes. Just a quick example about something a bit more recent. 10 years ago, more or less, sugar beets were hybridized, but they've already been able to double yield. I mean, that's very impressive in a short time. Yield's not the only thing that we want to deal with when it comes to breeding. And it's definitely not the only thing that farmers want. It's important for sure, but we also need to make sure that whatever we're putting onto our farm, we get a return on. And I think Bayer mentioned that, Albert said something like that on his new product that they're looking at. So when we at Solenta said, well, in order for people to believe that we can do things so quickly, we should pick something that's been really complicated for traditional potatoes to do, breeders to do, and then show that as an example. And we picked late blight Phytophthora as that example because if you look in the literature, people say that roughly speaking, 20% of the global potato yield every year is eliminated because of late blight. So we decided to put in a double stacked, so that means 2 genes of late blight resistance into one of our elite hybrids. We also decided to put 1 gene in just to see if we could do it and just to see if it made a difference, because you never know, 1 gene might be enough, right? So if you look at this picture, what you see, the green circles, this is a randomized trial, by the way, in Wakken in the Netherlands. The green circles are the hybrid with the double stack gene. The yellow or orange circles are the single gene, and the red is with no resistance at all. In the red, you can see most of the plants died, and in the green, almost none of the plants died. This proves the point that you can move the genes around once you identify them, and that you do get season-lasting resistance. And that season-lasting resistance, of course, helps stabilize yield. And in a country like South Africa and countries like the Netherlands and the EU, maybe blight's not the most important thing that we have to deal with. I heard this morning that powdery scab is a really big issue here. But blight cost the EU alone something like $6 billion annually in preventative spraying. Imagine what will happen when the EU eventually says, you know what, farmers, no more chemicals. All of a sudden, potato yields are going to go down in Europe. We've already seen it happen in the organic farming. Now, perhaps, we have a solution with hybrid breeding. Just to recap, let's look at, there's a lot of information on the slide, but let's just look at traditional breeding versus hybrid breeding. We're faster by a long shot. We actually can move genes into a product very quickly. We deliver via true seeds, so something that looks just like a vegetable seed and acts like a vegetable seed. And from a cleanliness point of view, we are phytosanitary clean, and we can be inspected like any other seed, a maize seed, a tomato seed, you name it. And there have been systems set up globally to manage that seed health. So now let's talk about this time issue. So if you do get a new variety of potatoes made from the traditional means, you basically start off with 1 tuber or 10 tubers that come with the plant, and then over about 8 years, you end up with enough tubers that you can launch on a commercial basis. But as I said earlier, every year you end up potentially increasing the disease load and reducing the potential of those genetics. That also delays farmers getting innovation. But with true seeds, you start off with 1 seed, and in 18 months you have almost an unlimited supply of seed. That's a way to get innovation to the farmer quickly and in a way where the seed is healthy and the farmers can benefit directly, and we can hopefully solve some of those challenges that are facing this industry really quickly and in a really timely way. Now let's continue the discussion about seed health, because that's really important, I think. True potato seeds are exactly like any other seed. You have to be careful how you produce them if you want to produce a quality product. Exactly like seed tubers, to be honest, in that regard. But you need to make sure that you have all the checks and balances in place, much like what a seed inspection would do with tuber certification. It's really not so different. But in some countries, they need to review new sources of crops. And in Australia, I'm going to use Australia as this example, they needed to review the literature and decide what diseases may or may not occur on various starting materials. And when they looked at seed tubers, they found that someplace between 62 and 200 possible diseases were transmitted through a seed tuber. In microtubers and mini tubers, 60 more or less, tissue culture 47, and in true seeds, they could only come up with 9, 2 bacterias and 7 viruses. Now, of that list, only 1 became interesting for them. That's not on this slide, and that's PSTVD, something that was mentioned earlier today as well. And so the conclusions are conclusions that I draw, not necessarily that the Australian government drew, but that true potato seeds are actually safer than almost any other form of introducing genetics in the potato value chain. And from a phytosanitary point of view, the risk to the farmer or to the country really depend on the further multiplication of that seed, not just the introduction of genetics from a true seed. So to summarize, hybrid breeding in potatoes has already been proven, and at Salenta we did that. Multiplication from true seed speeds the innovation to the growers, and that's something we're going to have in the future if we're going to solve these problems. And lastly, and certainly not least, true seeds are very clean and safe from a phytosanitary point of view. So fine, I can tell you all these things, but you probably want to see what this looks like, right? So let me show you some of the things we're doing in Africa. Just to go back, that happens to be a seedling nursery in Rwanda, I think. And so you can see that even in rather low-tech conditions, that we can successfully grow a tremendous amount of seedlings. And this is no different than how the vegetable industry works. So at Salenta, we're really building a new road with this new technology. And within Africa, we're using 2 countries as the anchor. We're using Kenya for East and Central Africa, and we're using South Africa for Southern Africa, and somewhere in the middle we're going to meet. We're engaging with all the regulators so that we get the enabling environment workable for this technology, and we're selecting the varieties locally. That's not really something that potatoes are used to. They're big global selections of, varieties. We're also adjusting growing protocols locally because some varieties have different needs than others, much like maize or other crops. And then we also do a lot of capacity building with the regulators, but also with farmers, with nurseries. And then we finally, and not last for a particular reason, but finally we work with a lot of the downstream off-takers. So, we work with the processors and we work with the grocery store chains, etc. But we do exactly what most seed companies do. We test products locally, we decide if the genetics works, and then we start to scale up. And then we move out to the farmer level. We test to make sure it brings value to the farmer. This happens to be a hybrid selection trial that we're doing in Kenya. Speaking of Kenya, I was in Kenya last week doing a stakeholder workshop where we brought about 20, 25 people together, and all people across the regulatory environment, from the Plant Breeders' Rights to the Seed Association. And we went through step by step what it takes to use true potato seeds and hybrids in their market. You see the seedlings on the left growing in the field. You see tubers that were uprooted. You see kind of some sorted tubers that could be used for seed. And then lastly, you see ware products that are going to the market. Fine. In Kenya, it's kind of let's say, a medium technology market, but what does it look like in a generally lower technology market? This happens to be in Malawi. In Malawi, we're actually planting 10 hectares of one of our varieties, and so for that, we needed a large greenhouse. So we grew the seedlings in a greenhouse, and we had some seedlings left over. We planted a few more than we needed for 10 hectares. And we planted 1 hectare completely under shade with drip irrigation and drip fertigation, and we're going to produce a seed crop there. And then the 10 hectares in the field, exactly like any other field production, except in this case, it was planted by hand. So we actually spent some time educating people how you plant seedlings by hand on 10 hectares. And after 60 days, it looks like a potato field. No difference, because these are potatoes. And these guys are going to harvest, I think, a very nice crop. And I would guess much higher yielding than the average potato crop. So what does the future of hybrid true potato seeds look like? Well, at a really high level, you introduce new genetics through hybrid breeding via a true seed, one of these tiny seeds just like tomatoes. Those seeds have to go to a nursery. And that's not an issue, even at huge scale, because that's becoming more and more common in the vegetable industry. Farmers don't like growing their own seedlings. They'd rather outsource it and reduce their risk and then get delivered seedlings. Those seedlings get transplanted. Once they've been transplanted, they're treated just like a potato. And in the end, they produce tubers, exactly like we all do. And then we have a choice. Are they seed tubers or are they ware potatoes? It's a choice you have to make when you get started, because obviously there's different ways of managing each crop. But let's dive in a little bit. And at Salenta, our dream is that ultimately you're going to plant a seed in the field and you're going to get potatoes. That's really what we want to do. But we know that's probably not going to happen, at least in the foreseeable future. My lifetime, maybe. So we know that we're going to go from true seeds through a nursery of some kind. We're going to transplant, and we're going to grow Generation 1 tubers, which means we have to fit inside the seed certification scheme. So that's one of the discussions we have to have. And it's really good to know that this country is so forward-thinking. They've already thought of that. They're already taking up innovation, and true potato seeds are already on a certification scheme. But I'd say there are a lot of countries like that. I mean, Canada's like that. We've had some of our products certified in Canada, so they've successfully run through that system, no issue. But because of the economics, and one of the reasons that we have these seed certification schemes and we have so many generations sometimes is economics. We need to get those tubers to the right cost point. We might actually have to go to 3 seasons. It's possible. To be honest, we don't know exactly what that model is going to look like just yet. But we do know that in order to build this new road, that we're all going to have to work together to solve those problems. And we know that we're going to have to deal with the phytosanitary regulations, we're going to have to deal with variety registration, we're going to have to deal with seed certification. And that's not done by an individual, it's done by an industry. It's done by a group. And that's one of the reasons I really appreciate being asked to speak here today, is to talk about this new innovation and how it could work. And we're doing all those tests to understand here in South Africa, do we go from seed to ware potatoes? Do we go from seed to Generation 1 to ware potatoes? All those things are in the works. And I wish I could give you an answer of what exactly this is going to look like in the end, but I don't know. I do know, however, that this solves many of the problems that are being faced by the potato growers and our consumers around the world, and that this delivers potatoes in a good way, in a clean way, that are very tasty and demanded by our consumers. So, thank you very much.